Well, hello there, my fellow rushers. How are you doing today? King Rexy here. And today, I decided, you know what? Let's redo some Kingdom Rush tier lists. Because I was looking at some of my older tier lists for towers and heroes, and they are quite interesting to say the least. Like, compared to how I view the towers and heroes now, it's a night and day difference. So, I decided to start off with probably my most controversial list, which is the tower rankings for Kingdom Rush Alliance, because if you know me, you're probably aware of the fact that my opinion of Alliance is a bit iffy, but at the time when I was making my first Alliance tier list, I barely had like 20 hours in the game. Now I have over 200, so I feel a little more confident at ranking the towers correctly. And as you can see here, we have the tiers, and we're hopefully gonna rank all the towers accordingly. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say, so without wasting any more time, let's re-rank all towers in Kingdom Rush Alliance! Okay, so before we begin, I wanna notify you that this tier list in particular is going to be at least mostly objective. I wanna make it as less subjective as possible, well, just to give you guys a more accurate ranking of each individual tower. And what better tower to start off than the Royal Archers? They are decent, you know. Their DPS is rather good, sitting at a nice and around 40 DPS on average. Not bad at all. What about their abilities? Their first upgradable skill is Armor Piercer. It is one of the simplest yet good abilities in the game, being able to dish out 3 arrows that deal 120 to 150 damage and also ignore 50% armor. That's very good. And when you add the fact that it only has 12 seconds cooldown, it makes it even better. And the tower is quite cheap too, if you think about it. It only costs 580 gold to get to tier 4, not counting the abilities. So far, this tower seems very good, and it would be even better if this goofy-ass skill was different. I'm talking, of course, about Rapacious Bird. You waste 600 gold just to gain a stupid falcon that does very mediocre damage. Do you want to know how much DPS this ability does at tier 3? Do ya? Because I'm not sure if you do. Well, here it comes. Which one of those 3 numbers do you think is the correct DPS? Well, did you get your answers? That was a trick question, in fact, because it is even lower than any of these numbers. Grand total of 26 DPS for 600 gold. Yikes. If this skill was different or stronger, I would rank them higher on the list, but the Royal Archers still make it into the B tier. And now we have the Paladin Covenant. Honestly, I feel so stupid for believing they were great. Maybe I was overwhelmed by nostalgia back in the day from the first game, and I assumed they will be on the same level as their original counterpart. But that is not the case. Sure, they try to be tanky, sitting at 198 HP with 40% armor, which accumulates to a total of 330 effective HP, which honestly isn't all that much. Do you want to know how much effective HP the original Paladins used to have? They had 500, which is quite a noticeable difference. And they also had good damage with their Holy Strike, great sustain with Healing Light, and they could also improve their armor by 30% with the Shield of Valor. What can the Paladins and Alliance do? Nothing interesting. They're basically a tanky barrack with very low DPS of only 13. Also, 10 seconds respawn rate is quite high compared to the rest of the barracks in the game. Sure, it goes down to 8 seconds once you get all the upgrades, but still, that is quite long, as you're gonna see later on. But maybe their abilities will be very strong, right? You know, you need to compensate for something. Nope. Lead by example is completely awful. The unit is alright, you know, it's not bad, but it's definitely like for how much gold you need to spend on it. As for its active skill, it sucks. 20% more base damage for 8 seconds is in a tiny area. Wow. And it has 20 seconds cooldown. How much DPS did the Paladins had again? 13. So when you add 20% to that, it's like 15.6, which is still very low. Such a good skill, Kappa. As for the healing prayer, it is good in some situations. If you're taking a long time to kill an enemy, sure, the healing prayer is gonna allow you to stall them for much longer, but since it has a very high cooldown, this skill becomes very situational. And at this point, if you're taking an extended amount of time to kill a high tier enemy, you probably should reconsider your strategy altogether instead of wasting gold on this ability. I am so sorry for what I'm about to do to you, my beloved paladins, but unfortunately, you have to go into the C tier. Let's move on to a much better tower, that being Arcane Wizard. It is pretty strong. Coming in with 50.5 DPS is already better than the Royal Archers, but it kinda checks out, since mages usually have higher DPS than archers. The tower is a bit more on the pricey side, coming in at whopping 760 gold to get up to tier 4, but I think it is worth it, especially when you take a look at the abilities. Disintegrate is busted. Having a 20.8 second cooldown insta-kill that can also deal up to 1500 magic damage to bosses and mini-bosses. Crazy, I know. His other skill, Empowerment, is decent too, boosting the base damage of all nearby towers by 40% for the exact same price as Rapacious Bird, mind you. It is so funny knowing that you can either get a bird with mediocre DPS or to boost all the nearby towers damage by 40% for the exact same price. Incredible. Not much to say here other than this tower is strong. Into the A tier you go. Oh boy, the next tower is a bit more controversial. If you know me well, you probably are aware of how much I disliked the Tricannon. Sure, it is a decent tower, but it used to be very trashy when the game came out. However, over time, it became a powerhouse. Coming in at 28 to 42 explosive damage 3 times on a 3-second cooldown attack speed is very high in terms of damage. However, when you crunch down the numbers, the DPS is actually not as astonishing, coming in at only 35 DPS in total. That is lower than the Royal Archer by 5 points, but you also have to consider other things besides the number. That is 35 explosive area damage, meaning that it can hit multiple enemies, while the Royal Archer is a single target physical damage. Granted, the overheat skill being bad and the generally high price of the tower hurt it quite a bit, but it all becomes obsolete when you take a look at Bombardment, an ability that fires off not 10, not 15, but 22 freaking shots at tier 3. Each shot normally deals between 40 to 80 explosive damage, but with the Empowerment upgrade, it deals the maximum damage always. Do you realize how much raw, uncensored damage you get out of this skill? That is literally 1760 explosive damage. Damn! What the fuck? Although the targeting is supposed to be random, the tower lands at least half of its shots the majority of the time, which is still 880 damage. But wait, there is more. What is the cooldown of this stupidly overpowered skill, you may ask? It has to be high number like 20 to 30 seconds, right? No, not really. It just casually has a 15 seconds cooldown. That means if all shots connect with at least one target and you have the Empowerment upgrade, you essentially have 58.6 DPS on this skill, which is incredible. Still, I cannot put it quite into the S tier due to the high price of the tower and the lack of synergy between its skills. For that, it's going into the A tier, right above the Arcane Wizard. But hey, A tier is still really good too. Next on the list is Ballista Outpost. This tower is peculiar. It is more expensive than the Royal Archer. It costs 660 gold to get up to tier 4, yet it has basically the same damage output. Like what? Sure, 40.3 is technically higher than 40, but come on now. That is not even a full point of damage. And you have to consider the 3.9 seconds attack speed. That is slower than the Tricannon, which is hella sus in my opinion. The Royal Archers are always superior in terms of cost efficiency. But what about the abilities of the Ballista? Are they any good? They are mid. Final Nail is decent due to this 2-second stun, but there are better options. Scrap Bomb is pretty good on the other hand. 142 to 214 explosive damage on top of a zone that slows by 50% for 6 seconds is good. And yes, even though the description suggests that this ability deals physical damage, in reality it deals explosive damage, making it slightly better. The cooldown is quite high at the start, but when you max the skill out, it only has 16 seconds cooldown, so it is not that bad. Personally, I don't think this tower is terrible, but it is definitely more situational than the Royal Archer. So for that, I will put it in B tier, below the Royal Archer. And now, it is finally time to talk about the Arborean Emissary. Need I say much? It is a very cheap mage tower with incredible range, allowing it to be put on tower spots in which most other towers will be considered suboptimal. The base damage might be low, sitting at only 16.3, but the on-hit effect is more than enough to compensate. For a couple of seconds, the enemy hit takes between 20 to 50% more damage from all sources, depending on which tier the Arborean Emissary is at, of course. But it can also work on mini-bosses and bosses, making it insane on boss levels, or on levels that have mini-bosses in general. And its skills are great. Gift of Nature makes your choke point last longer, and Bramble Grasp is essentially Rat of the Forest with lower damage, but still, 40 true damage to up to 8 targets on a 16 seconds cooldown is quite decent. And with all of that being said, this is going to be the first tower on the list that makes it into the S tier. Demon Pit, Demon Pit, Demon Pit. I went from hating on this tower to loving it. I mean, think about it. For 80 gold, you gain 1 demon every 4 seconds that can tank for a second, exploding on death, dealing some area damage and stunning everything for a brief moment.
It's free real estate.
That is an insane amount of stalling power for a tier 1 barrack. Sure, the lack of rally range can suck, but it is not that bad. Ironhide executed this tower much better than what they did with Grim Cemetery and Vengeance. At tier 4, the demons still can die in one hit, but at least the skills are quite decent. At least one of them. Master Exploders allows them to deal more damage on their death explosion, which is kinda cosmetic. But the real deal comes from the burn they apply. At tier 3, Master Exploder burn damage can reach anywhere from 120 to 200 true damage. That is a lot of damage when you think about it. Big Boss is a good skill on paper, but ever since I learned that it has whopping 40 seconds cooldown, I started hating it. Don't get me wrong, the big demon is alright, but the cooldown really cucks this skill. Either way, you can spam tier 1 Demon Pit and get insane stalling value. Don't get any ideas about them being broken though. The tower is generally good, but it has clear weaknesses. No anti-air, enemies that deal area damage can clap them very fast, and speaking of fast, fast-moving enemies can go by without being blocked since the demon has a delay before it spawns. Case in point. But overall, Demon Pit is not bad, but it is not OP as some people may think. Into the B tier you go! Moving on to a tower that I really like. The Battle Brewmaster. I love how their basic attack reduces the damage of enemies by 50% for 3 seconds. It really makes them goated on choke points, especially if the level has enemies that deal high damage. Speaking of damage, what is the DPS of a Battle Brewmaster at tier 4? It's only 30 DPS, which is slightly lower than the Tricannon, but you have to consider the cost of both towers as well. Tricannon costs 980 gold, while Battle Brewmaster costs only 910 gold. Now, Math is not my strong side, but I am pretty sure a tier 4 Battle Brewmaster is more cost efficient than a tier 4 Tricannon. Then again, this is just the base tower itself. In terms of abilities, Battle Brewmaster has quite mediocre skills. Elixir of Might summons a unit that only has 180 HP with no resistances to speak of, and it has 12 seconds respawn rate. Quite underwhelming if I have to say so myself. Granted, his DPS is very high for a barrack, but I prefer my barracks units to stall rather than to deal a massive amount of damage. And then there is Bad Batch. It is a giant barrel that actually has quite a small AoE size. It slows down enemies near it and deals 20 true damage over 5 seconds, after which it explodes and can deal anywhere between 288 to 432 damage. That is very inconsistent if you couldn't guess. It is quite inconsistent in fact. And the 24-second cooldown on this skill doesn't help it either. When you add everything together, Bad Batch has a tiny DPS. And when I say tiny, we're talking about 15 DPS. If we don't count the poison, of course, but then again, the poison is kinda cosmetic. That is horrendous. If the tower had strong skills, it could easily reach A tier, but for now, I will have to put it into the B tier. Oh boy, everyone's favorite Necromancer comes in. The Necro in Frontiers was goated, but as we saw with the Paladins, expectations don't always match the reality of the situation. Same applies here. Necromancer has a unique property that allows it to gather up to 4 skulls, similar to how the Archmage functioned in Frontiers, which is a niche little thing. Sitting at 34.6 DPS is not bad at all. However, when you compare it to the other mages in the game, this is not that great. In fact, it sits towards the low end. Granted, it can summon skeletons or bone golems, but they are pretty weak. A skeleton has only 55 HP, while a bone golem has 165, which is, now that I think about it, not terrible, but still. I suppose it is alright since you can gather quite a few of them. Fun fact, the skeleton cap gets increased based on the level of the tower, the more you know. If you have played Alliance before, which I assume you have, you probably know what the Death Rider does. It summons a Death Rider that charges across the path, dealing 150 true damage to all ground enemies. It is a very strong skill when you spam it. If you have only one Death Rider, the DPS is kinda meh, but when you get a couple of them going, you can clean up the battlefield out of almost all low tier enemies. Why would you spend so much gold for that when you can just, I don't know, buy an artillery or use a hero like Cosmere? Probably if you're doing a challenge, I guess. And then there is Rattling Beacon. It's bad. Sure, it gives your skeletons up to 150% more damage every 9.6 seconds. By the way, the skill lasts for 10 seconds, meaning that you can basically have it permanently up. But when those skeletons die in 1 to 2 hits, it doesn't make that much of a difference in my opinion. On the bright side, it puts a curse on the enemies, so they are guaranteed to turn into a skeleton if they die within range of the Necromancer. But that's about it. Overall, the Necro is decent as a mage. Basically, he's the Royal Archer of mages, weak individually, really good when spammed. It deserves a B tier, right below the Royal Archer, because in my opinion the Royal Archers are still a tiny bit better. But the Necromancer is just that at the end of the day. It's a B tier tower. Now, let me introduce you to our next S tier contestant on the list, that being Elven Stargazer. It's funny how the tables have turned over time. On the release, this tower was garbage. Most people classified it anywhere from D to C tier. And now it sits above the rest of the mages. I mean, when you're rocking casually 79.6 DPS, it just seems natural now, does it not? You could argue that it targets random enemies, but that doesn't change much. Let's blaze over the abilities of this tower real quick. Event Horizon is pretty good teleporting skill. At tier 3, it can teleport 6 enemies every 18 seconds, which is not bad, but not as OP as it could be. Definitely better than the Infernal Portal from Vengeance, but not quite on the same level as Giga Chadness, the teleport from the Arcane in Kingdom Rush 1 had. Even if this skill seems kinda mid, Rising Stars makes up for it tenfold. Every enemy killed by this tower at tier 3 explodes into 5 stars that deal between 36 to 54 magic damage each. Assuming you hit 5 enemies with that, you can deal a grand total of 180 to 270 magic damage. That is a passive skill, by the way. You just need to kill something, it doesn't have a cooldown. Do you realize how insane it is? And, as if this wasn't enough, the stars also stun the opponent on impact for 0.8 seconds. Wow. I don't think I need to say more. Get into the S tier, my beloved. We got 2 towers into S tier now. The next tower surely will be there, or at least close to it, right? Right? The next tower to be ranked is Dwarven Flamespitter. Guys, it hurts me when I have to analyze this tower, simply because it is one of my favorite towers in the game from a visual standpoint. However, looking cool doesn't guarantee that you are strong, and that cannot be more true than the case of the Dwarven Flamespitter. It deals between 32 to 60 damage, and it can set enemies on fire, dealing 64 true damage over 4 seconds. Wow, that sounds incredible. Decent damage values on top of a burn that does true damage. How could this be bad? Well, let's crack down the numbers. 32 plus 60 is 92, plus 14, which is how much the burn does per second at tier 4, equal to 108. Now we divide this number by 2, and then we divide it by the number of the attack speed value, which is 3.2 seconds. After doing the calculations, the grand total of its average DPS is, drumroll please, 16.8. That's it? Yes, indeed it is. And it would be even worse without the burn. If you remove the burn damage from the equation, the DPS goes down to 14.3. That is pathetic, pitiful, disgusting. Compared to Tricannon and Battle Brewmaster, it is saddening. And before you say that it can target flying enemies, why bother building an expensive tower for ad tier when you can just get something like, I don't know, a Royal Archer? And its abilities aren't any better. Blazing Trial is a bait skill. It has massive AoE of 600, but that only applies to the burn, which deals 16 true damage per second for 5 seconds. The actual explosion radius is much smaller, and the damage is meh. 280 is not bad when looked at first glance. However, when you realize this skill has a 20 seconds cooldown, its greatness starts to diminish quite a bit. Scorching Torches can be good, since it can deal true damage if the enemy is closer to the center of the eruptions. However, 180 to 300 damage on a 25 seconds cooldown is awful. We're talking about 9.6 DPS. Wow, I never thought Bad Batch would be better, but yeah, Bad Batch, one of the worst skills in the game, is better than this ability. Let that sink in. Also, if anyone asks, no, the stun doesn't make it any better in any way, shape or form. I really love this tower, but the numbers physically make me cringe when I look at the Dwarven Flamespitter. I am sorry, my beloved, but you will be the first tower to be put in the D tier. Man, that was rough. Maybe the next tower will be better. Nope, we gotta talk about Dune Sentinels. An overpriced archer that deals 27.5 damage per second on average and can bounce up to 4 other enemies. On paper it seems great, but when you realize that each bounce does 40% less damage one after the other, it becomes terrible. There isn't much to say other than this tower is ass. Sure, it can be used in some niche scenarios, for example, against Glarelings, Lesser Eyes, or Scrap Drones. A tier 4 Dune Sentinel can handle them pretty well, but those are very specific situations. At that point, just improve your defense and use better towers other than this garbage. And the abilities of the Dune Sentinels are not any better. Bounty Hunt is a scam, literal scam, since it is so expensive. 750 gold is what you have to spend on an ability that can give you 12 gold per kill, which is very low. And when you consider the damage of this skill, it makes it even worse, because you have to kill
a summoner has disconnected.
Around 60 enemies, I believe, to make the money back. 60 enemies. Unless you literally start with this skill maxed out, you're probably not gonna be able to make your money back in time. It is so bad. Like, brother, what's that? And then we have Whirling Doom, which is meh. It deals 64 damage on average per second in an area for 5 seconds, which is not terrible, but since the damage is physical, the numbers are going to be much lower. The slowdown effect is also hard to notice. 25% is towards the low end in the grand scheme of things. So, the tower is bad and outclassed. Where do you think it belongs? That's right, in D tier, right next to the Dwarven Flamespitter. At least my favorite tower has a friend, so it won't be feeling lonely during the duration of this tier list. Damn. Those were some awful towers. Can we get something good? Oh, yes sir. We arrived at the Rocket Gunners. Those guys are incredible. Now, as a barrack unit, they suck. Having only 110 HP with 25% armor is quite mediocre. But their ranged attack is what defines them as a good barrack / archer. 40 to 60 damage every 2 seconds, leading us up to 25 DPS per unit. Combine the two, and you have a grand total of 50 DPS. That is insane. That is more than the Royal Archers and the Ballista Outpost. It is so funny seeing a barrack having higher DPS than an archer. Kinda reminds me of the elite harassers from Vengeance in a way. But this is not Vengeance tier list now, is it? Anywho, where are we up to? Oh yes, the abilities of the Rocket Gunners. Phosphoric Coating is very good skill, reducing 3% of armor per hit and dealing tiny bit of area damage on top of that is awesome. But that skill pales in comparison to Sting Missile. Every 12.8 seconds, you can insta-kill an enemy that is at 900 HP or lower. Sure, it is not as satisfying as an actual insta-kill, it's more of an execute, but I think 900 HP cap is quite solid. Rocket Gunners would be one of the S tier towers if they were an archer tower. Since they are a barrack unit, at the end of the day, they can be killed by enemies. Even if you lift them up in the air, they can still be targeted directly by enemies who possess ranged attacks, or indirectly by units who deal area damage. Adding their respawn rate to the mix, that is 8 seconds, gives them a penalty. For that reason, they will be slided down into the A tier, but that is still good, especially after the two atrocious towers that we talked about beforehand. Next on the list is Alex Blaze, aka Eldritch Channeler. This is basically a blazing gem from Vengeance with a few tweaks. For starters, the damage displayed on the tower menu indicates the total damage the tower does, which would be 248 magic damage over 4.75 seconds. Unless you have Dark Army heroes, but I'm trying to consider the towers without the hero boost. 248 divided by 4.75 is 52.2 DPS, which is higher than the Arcane Wizard. As far as the abilities are concerned, they are alright. Power Overflow allows you to chain up to 3 other enemies besides the main target, dealing 25, 50 and then 75% of the total damage. It also slows, but I don't remember what the slow amount was. But from what I have tested, it seems to be on the low end, probably around 30%. Regardless, being able to deal 186 magic damage to up to 3 other enemies is quite insane when you think about it. Assuming you're hitting the maximum amount of targets for the full duration, Eldritch Channeler deals an astonishing 806 damage, which means that is 169.6 DPS. Crazy stuff! Sure, it doesn't come closer to the mind-boggling 1760 damage from Bombardment, but it is still quite high. Mutation Hex is alright. A polymorph every 18.4 seconds is solid. The cooldown is shorter than Disintegrate, but you also have to consider that it is a single tier ability, while Disintegrate has 3 total tiers you need to buy. Overall, Eldritch Channeler is an amazing tower. As long as you can put it in a choke point, the tower does wonders. However, I don't think it is broken, since the tower doesn't perform well outside of choke points. So in that case, Eldritch Channeler goes into the A tier. I'll put him above Arcane Wizard, simply due to the superior stats and efficiency. Don't get me wrong though, both towers are great, but Eldritch Channeler is, at least in my opinion, slightly better. Okay, so far so good. Who's next on the list? Oh no. No! No! Ugh. Grim Wraiths. The tower that haunts me in my dreams every time I play, watch or talk about Alliance. This tower is both the best and the worst one at the same time. Allow me to explain for those who are unfamiliar with Alliance. Grim Wraith's main shtick is that they can trade their positions with another tower spot. Teleporting Grim Wraiths to a new strategic point is insane because it can also instantly respawn them and heal them back to full, which is quite broken if you use it properly. You can do a lot of cool things with this mechanic, but as a nonc myself, I cannot grasp all of it completely. I'll return to this mechanic in a bit. For now, let me talk about their base stats. At tier 4, they have 110 health, which is the same as the rocket gunners. However, they got 60% armor. That is more than the paladins, by the way. Still, their effective HP is a bit less than the paladins. The Grim Wraiths have 275 effective HP, while the paladins had 330. And when you consider that there are only 2 Grim Wraiths, the overall effective HP is noticeably lower. And yet, Grim Wraiths are really good. Their basic attack deals true damage, in case you don't know. Sure, 16 to 24 is kinda low, but it is 20 true damage per second from a barrack. Not bad at all. If you want to increase it, look no further than Soul Siphoning. At tier 3, it grants the Grim Wraiths 100% bonus attack damage if they spend at least 5 seconds in combat, meaning that their damage will go up from 16 to 24 to 32 to 48. All of a sudden, their DPS becomes much better. Granted, this skill is conditional, so it is not as good as the other ability we can talk about, which is Undying Dread. What does the skill do? After the Grim Wraith dies, they fling their soul at the enemy, dealing 180 true damage. That is pretty good already, as it is. But there is more. Additionally, the target gets their movement speed and attack damage reduced by 50% for a few seconds. Do you want to know why this is so broken? Well, let's say the Grim Wraiths have only 6 seconds respawn rate. Not as short as the Demon Pit, but considering how much power a maxed out Grim Wraith holds, it is not that big of a deal. They are basically paladins that can deal damage and stall high tier enemies, even mini bosses, all by themselves, for the most part. This is by far one of the best barracks in the game, unironically. I can't believe that I'm going to say this, but Grim Wraiths go into S tier.
Yes, first place.
Somewhere out there, Darren let out a tear of joy. You won the war, buddy. Congratulations. You can rest now. Moving on to the Twilight Longbow. This tower is unique to say the least. When it came out alongside Undying Fury, this tower was quite bad. So, is it any better now? Well, let's find out. For starters, this is the second most expensive archer tower. It costs a total of 640 gold, just slightly cheaper than the Ballista Outpost. The tower does between 134 to 146 physical damage, which is both high and consistent. But, and that's a big but, it has 2.95 seconds attack speed, meaning that its DPS is close to, well, not close to, it's exactly 47.4, which is higher than any of the actual archer towers when you think about it. I'm not counting the rocket gunners though, because at the end of the day they are a barrack, so if you wanna count them, the rocket gunners technically have more damage, but still. Let's go back to talking about the Twilight Longbow. One of the 3 great things about this tower is the targeting option. Yes, that's right, you can manually change between targeting either the enemy closest to the exit, or you can target the enemy with the most health. Very good considering the very slow attack speed of this tower. But wait, it all gets better. What if I told you that this tower can infinitely scale? Look no further than Thrill of the Hunt. Every time it kills an enemy, the tower gains between 1 to 2 damage permanently. By the way, this number can be influenced by alternative damage boosts like Empowerment from the Arcane Wizard, which is a niche little interaction. this would be Giga Broken. Luckily, the tower does physical damage as mentioned prior, so it isn't as OP as it might seem. Last but not the least, we have the Support Blades. This ability summons 2 elite harassers that can be rallied within a short range. At tier 3, they have 132 HP, they deal 22 to 34 physical damage, they have 25% armor and have 60% dodge chance, which is very good. Those guys have the potential to be very tanky, because 132 divided by 0.5 and then you divide by 0.4 is 440 effective HP per unit. Not bad at all for costing only 450 gold total. I really like this tower. Its only weakness is mostly armored enemies and units that can deal area damage since dodge chance doesn't count against AoE attacks. Twilight Longbow is close to being broken, but the damage type limits its power greatly. It makes the player also utilize a unique strategy that ends up being quite rewarding in the late game, and I love that. Like, you trade off your early game to make this tower much stronger in the late game. I love towers that make the player utilize a different playstyle than normal. For that, you go into the A tier. Oh man, we found Pollux's device. Oops, I mean the Bug Hermit. This tower is special, to say the least. Imagine a tower that can be used either as a mage or a pseudo-artillery. Well, you don't need to, since Bug Hermit is a thing that exists. This tower can alternate between 2 modes, magic and artillery. The magic form does 47 to 63 damage every 1.2 seconds, which is quite good. 45.8 is a decent-ish DPS, but the range of the tower becomes shorter in that mode, so you have to consider this. Speaking of range, in its artillery form, it gains bonus range at the expense of having much slower attack speed. But when I explain what the artillery mode does, you will think that this penalty is not enough. While in artillery mode, the tower does between 45 to 59 physical damage. Yes, it is physical, there is a reason I said pseudo-artillery at the start. In this stage, Bug Hermit has 2.5 seconds attack speed, so the DPS is significantly lower, dealing measly 20.8. Which is still higher than the Dwarven Flamespitter, by the way, which is an actual artillery. I swear, the Dwarven Flamespitter gets worse and worse the more I mention it. Anyways, back to the Bug Hermit. It may lack in the DPS department while in this stance. It makes up for it with another special property. Every attack slows down enemies for 1.57 seconds. The slow amount is not very noticeable at tier 1 and 2, but once you get it up to tier 4, the slow amount is 50%, which is quite significant. I personally prefer using this tower as an artillery rather than a mage, but it can serve its functions as a mage if need be. The abilities though, the abilities perfectly represent the duality of a good and a bad ability. Ground Pounder does only 180 physical damage in an area, and it stuns enemies hit for 4 seconds. I mean, it's alright, but on a 20 seconds cooldown, that really weighs down the ability in my opinion. On the other hand, Sticky Tongue is insane. An insta-kill on a 14.4 seconds cooldown should be illegal in this day and age. And it has a single tier upgrade, like you don't need to spend more gold on it, like why? Who saw this tower, approved it and said it is okay to have it in the game? I guess we'll never know. In any case, this tower is one of those weird ones, where I want to put it in the S tier, but in reality it is not quite there yet. Look, you cranky frog, I am going to put you in the A tier, but in my heart you are definitely in the S tier. Okay guys, we spent a lot of time on this tier list already, so in order to save time, I will try to speedrun through the last 3 entries, since all of them are very OP in the current meta. So, let's roll! Cannoneer squad shouldn't have been buffed ever. A unit with 154 HP, 30% armor, possessing both melee and ranged attacks. You can have up to 5 of them per tower, and they respawn every 6 seconds, like what? How is that fair? How is that a fair tower? Like, why? Why does this tower need a buff? Why was this tower buffed? Like, why? Like, none of the barracks can compete. Like, none. Also, incendiary ammo, I think it was called, is quite busted. Into the S tier you go. Like, no questions asked, just get in there. Search Colossus is basically Elven Stargazer all over again. It was very weak in the beta version of Arachnophobia, but then it got overbuffed to the moon. It has insane true damage per second, an AoE slow zone that lasts 10 seconds and deals damage, and can also stun all non-boss enemies with crystallization, making them also take % more damage. Not much to say other than that. This tower was a mistake. Like, why? Why do you need to be so broken? Just escort yourself into the S tier now, would ya? Speaking of a mistake, the last entry on this list is none other than the Bamboo Masters. This tower. It has 3 seconds respawn rate on a unit with somewhat high HP. It has good base damage, an AoE stun that does true damage, and a teleport on a very short cooldown that can also work on mini-bosses, by the way. Like, what is this amalgamation of a tower? No other tower can do what the Bamboo Masters can. Even though the tower is somewhat new, I cannot stand it. Like, every time I see this tower, I'm just like, why is this a thing? Why do you exist? Into the S tier you go, and you will probably stay there for a long, long time. And there you have it. My renewed tier list for all the towers in Kingdom Rush Alliance. Is it perfect? Probably not, but you cannot make a tier list fully objective, no matter how hard you try. If Dudu couldn't do it in his Ultimate Hero ranking tier list, I probably can't do that either. So, to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm gonna put this current tier list and my very first tier list of Kingdom Rush Alliance towers, so we can kind of compare how some of the towers evolved over time, and I think it is quite nice to see. In any case, let me know what you guys think of my new and improved tier list. If you wish to see me redo another Kingdom Rush related tier list from the past, let me know in the comments below. And with that out of the way, that is gonna do it for today's video. Thank you everybody so much for watching, I appreciate you for sticking around to the end. Subscribe if you want to see more of this content in the future, and while you're at it, drop a like on the video, it means a lot to me. And I will see you in the next video. Until it comes, that was King Rexy, over and out.